Today's tales have to do with CSGO, World of Warcraft, and entitled parents. Let us know down below in the comments which story you liked better, and we'll choose one of the funny ones to put at the start of the next video, like this one. Also, drop a thumbs up. For some backstory, this happened a while ago when I was pretty young, so I was pretty naive at the time, thinking no one could be evil and stupid enough to do this, but well, if this guy wasn't, I wouldn't have an amazing story to share. It's pretty amazing, but here's the TLDR for you lazy folks. Guy tries to scam me online of a 200 euro CSGO virtual item, but gave me his passport. After finding his parents' name and calling them, he still doesn't give it back, so we file a police report. The police investigates and makes a 200-page report, ending us up in court where he has to repay me the worth of the knife, and he gets a fraud notice in his police report for 5 years, ruining his chances of getting a job in the near future. From this point forward, me is a young boy, MD is my dad, S is the scammer, a bit older than me, old enough to get punished for a crime, SD is the scammer's dad, and SM is the scammer's mom. Steam is a game platform allowing people to trade virtual goods. The knife is a virtual good that is worth 200 euros. So this was a couple of years ago. I'd gotten to know S through a community he was starting. He previously owned a huge community with daily 100 player peak, so he seemed trustworthy. I was planning on joining as a volunteer moderator and had been talking to him for a while. He seemed nice and normal, and he asked to borrow my knife to try it out. I didn't think much of it, but of course I wasn't going to just give it to him, so I asked him if he had anything I could get in the meantime with an approximate value of my knife. He didn't. So I then asked him to take a picture of his passport. Now this picture was taken perfectly as I instructed, held up where you can see it all next to his open profile, linking them together, not allowing anyone to claim it was just a random passport picture. With this flawless piece of evidence, I thought there was no way this guy would be dumb enough to try something. Since I still wanted to join his community, I did it as a friendly gesture. Turns out he's not as smart as I think, because after 2 hours, the time we agreed on, I tell him to give it back and he acts like he never received anything, but says he knows a friend who has a knife just like mine. I understand this is going south and tell my dad. My parents are amazing, truly. When I told him that an older person had taken something from me online, he asked me if I had anything as proof. Well, I had a picture of his passport linking the profile to his and lots of screenshots of our chat. My dad thought the best action was to try and contact scammer's parents. Our country has a national registry allowing anyone to search up another person through their ID number, find out who they are and who their parents are. So the next day, we did. Scammer's dad answers in the morning. My dad describes the situation, and scammer's dad said he will absolutely take care of it, telling him he'll call him back in the evening. Evening comes, no call. We decide to call them. Scammer's dad answers but has now changed his tone. Scammer's dad says that scammer has said that it's a present. I have him, as such he's not giving it back, saying I have to believe my son. Now I don't believe for a second that the parents don't know what's going on. It's pretty obvious that no one gives a random person a gift worth 200 euros, but apparently this seemed completely normal. I have to believe my son. So at this point I really didn't have any choice. I submit a police report for the principle of doing it and move on. Weeks go by and we get called to get our side of the story. Strange. Something might happen? Apparently this guy has gotten multiple police reports before, and due to this case landing in the Department of Minors, a well-funded department of the police, it seems like it didn't get dropped even though it was a very small amount. After me submitting evidence and the police talking to both me and scammer, they produce a 200-page report detailing everything. We're baffled. A court date is set and it's on. The day comes around and I'm pumped. Hell yeah. I'm gonna do what everyone else dreams of, taking a scammer to court, and in the process hopefully setting a precedent for future cases. Turns out this was the first one in my country of this type. We walk into the courthouse and are met by scammer, scammer's dad, and scammer's mom, and like 4 other family relatives. If this succeeds, it's going to be fun. Exposing scammer in front of his family. Court starts and right away this seems like a win. Defense attorney is doing nothing. All his defenses are lacking and we get a lot of home runs. By the look of the jury's face, I can see it's a win. We leave the courtroom for 30 minutes and after that they're done. I get back the amount he took from me plus interest. He gets a notice in his criminal record and gets shamed in front of his whole family. My smile is so big at this point, it was filling the entire courtroom. All relatives are going back and forth furious. Scammer had his head down, facing the table. Booyah. In the end, they ended up appealing, but get rejected. I get my compensation and he can't get a good job for the next 5 years. Sweet, sweet gamery revenge. We've seen a lot of shadiness in the CSGO world, but it is interesting to see one where somebody doing the scamming actually gets caught. So as I said in a previous story, I used to be unhealthily addicted to World of Warcraft. I started in the original vanilla game and hit max level fairly late on. I managed to do some raiding, but was pretty much a filthy casual. During the first expansion, Burning Crusade, I hit a level cap 70 quickly on my hunter and got a lot more involved in the raiding scene. I eventually went inactive after being kicked out from a hardcore raid guild due to not having unlocked the next stage of raiding, and my story begins then, a couple of months before the end of that expansion. Also for this story, I'm going to assume a base level of knowledge around how MMORPGs work, and in particular World of Warcraft. But if there's any clarification needed, then please feel free to ask. I came back to the game after a month or so and found myself in a casual guild that was trying to make the jump to the next level of 25-man raids, progress in TK plus SSC. Part of the raid team used to hang out on Ventrilo, which is a voice chat mostly shortened to Vent, after raids, and I became fast friends with this lot. We were mostly all newer joiners to the guild and all enjoyed theory crafting and tweaking / perfecting our setups. We eventually became the backbone of the raid squad, and our friendly group grew as the guild did. We weren't elitist, and when we recruited new players, we made a point of inviting them to hang out with us on Vent and join smaller 10-man raids so we could get to know them. When 2 of our number were made guild officers and took over leading raids, we began to clear more and more content and started making a small name for ourselves on our backwater server. Of course, this couldn't last, and the original guild leader, who had been absent, supposedly with real-life issues, I later found out that he was just playing on another server, came back when he heard how well we were doing and took control. I'll call him AF. AF played a tank spec warrior when he returned, and he brought with him his best friend who played my class. They tended to keep to themselves and only spoke to officers or long-time guild members. I called his BFF Noob Hunter because he was both. Immediately, our raid performance dropped when AF was leading for several reasons. The first was his favoritism. Some of the old guildies were nice people but weren't the best players and didn't optimize their characters. AF would always pick the old timers, which pushed any of us newer players to the standby list. Obviously, having the weaker players in the raid will cause issues, but the fact that a lot of them hadn't done fights at all didn't help things. Secondly, because he hadn't been around for the revamp of the raiding, he didn't know what had made the new raid successful, mainly a friendly environment with no naming and shaming that worked with players to get the best out of them and was clear on what was expected. AF would shout people down for standing in fire, etc., and then die to the same fire himself. He didn't know the tactics and would often confuse things by switching tactics mid-fight. Watching him screw up taunts and get DPS killed was also not fun. Lastly, gear. The cause of the arguments in many guilds. AF and Noob Hunter were behind in gear, having done all of their raiding in Karazhan, an earlier, easier 10-man raid. However, because they've been clearing that a lot further back in the guild's history and for a long time, they both still had big stacks of Dragon Kill points, which we'll refer to as DKP. DKP are typically assigned for attendance when clearing raids, and you use them to bid on items that drop. They ensure loot is distributed fairly, and most sensible guilds apply a decay to your points once a week so that loot goes to active players. However, our guild didn't have this, so they still had a ton of DKP each. Almost immediately, the return had a bad effect because in the content at the time, you needed well-geared tanks. Having him siphoning off tanking gear meant that it would now take longer to get ready for the next fights. He was also not a great tank. After a couple weeks, swapped to DPS and again started taking all the DPS play gear. AF throughout all of this would also try and bully players in the private warrior channel into passing on loot so he could have it. After a week or two of these terrible raids, it got easier to get a raid spot because some of the old timers didn't want to spend the evenings wiping. In WoW at that time, you could only run each raid once a week and then it had to reset on Tuesday. This meant that the Wednesday raid did all of the easy bosses and the latter raids in the week were against the harder bosses, ones that we hadn't cleared yet. I'd only get spots on the harder raids, would wipe on content we're supposed to kill, and then we finally down a boss. Some of the loot goes to people who hadn't contributed or spent most of the fight dead in the case of Noob Hunter. The guild's progress stalled, but we still managed to scrape our way through the stuff we'd already cleared, occasionally failing to clear even that. In my case, I was already the weakest geared hunter. You didn't actually need great gear to clear what we were clearing as a hunter, and I had some of the best stuff available to me at the time, outside of the raids we were doing. Noob Hunter outbid me on everything, although sometimes I bid on bad drops for laughs to get him to take it. And when he joined, he was in blues, but soon outpaced me with his massive DKP advantage. AF would use the level of my gear to keep me out of raids, despite my performance being regularly top, or at least very top 3 out of all DPS in the guild, and was normally one of the last DPS standing on wipes. The other 3 hunters were decent guys, and previously we'd rotate out for bosses we didn't need to split loot. AF started refusing to let us to do this, so I couldn't bid against Noob Hunter. Back then you had to specialize as a hunter in 2 raid viable ways. You either went the highest DPS spec, which was Beast Mastery, or if you had enough agility on your gear, you went Survival and then buffed the entire raid, although with slightly lower personal damage. I made the switch to Survival due to a couple of drops the other hunters passed on, and because I saw it as a way to help the team and potentially get more regular raid spots. Within a week of my swap, Noob Hunter was appointed Hunter class leader, and he declared that he was now the guild's Survival Hunter. I was locked out of a raid spot as you only needed 1 Survival Hunter. 2 weeks of terrible DPS later, he switched back, proclaiming that Survival is overrated and you can't do good DPS with the spec. On my first raid back, with now the lowest gear in the hunter group, I was again ahead of all the other hunters as Survival. I managed to secure a slightly more regular spot as soon as they realized that the boost my spec provided made certain fights a bit easier, although I still got outbid a lot by Noob Hunter. So on top of this, then triggered a chain of events that would piss off the rest of the guild. First of all, he swapped class to Rogue and took all of the DKP with him, wasting all the time we'd spent gearing his warrior in 2 specs. It then became apparent that AF and Noob Hunter had been taking the sellable BOE raid loot for themselves instead of selling it on the auction house for the guild's benefit. And I also found out through my officer friends that they were both using the guild bank as their own piggy bank. That was made worse a week later when he made it so you could buy DKP by donating gold to the guild. That same week, to add cherry to the sundae, we found out that he'd applied on his new rogue to the guild that had just passed us on progression while we were stalled. He generously said he'd be around to help lead our raids on his warrior though. I spoke to my friends and told them I was done lining AF's pockets and carrying him and his parasitic mates through content and would rather be guildless for the new expansion than in that guild. Then, before the raid that evening, I asked him in front of everyone on Vent why he got to profit from the guild and then drop us for greener pastures. He got flustered and then immediately kicked me from the raid, so I calmly kept asking on Vent, which he didn't control. And he more or less nerd raged. He said none of us new people had contributed to the guild and we needed to respect him because he'd created the guild and what he said went. He fined me in large chunks of my accumulated DKP and threatened to dock DKP points from anyone else who disagreed. I pointed out his shortcomings as a raid leader and a player, muted him briefly on Vent to stop him shouting, and then laid everything out for the raiders. I swiftly dropped a message in guild chat laying it all out there too, before he could kick me, then peaced out and quit the guild. Almost immediately, my in-game chat log was filled with either conciliatory messages trying to get me back, messages of support / sympathy, or hate messages from AF and his cronies. My revenge. I had hoped to kick up a fuss and maybe convince a couple players to leave, but before I'd even started my revenge, people started leaving. After I'd left, a couple other players immediately dropped raid group and then quit the guild. All of my friends, leaving one to spy on what was happening, quit too. And in 10 minutes, the guild lost its 7 best DPS, 2 main tanks, and 3 healers, completely gutting the raid group. What did surprise me was a couple of players who we thought had been in AF's crew were some of the first to leave, showing that they too had been unaware of what was going on. Within an hour, my revenge plan became clear. I started another guild with my friends, and we targeted the guildless players and any left in the guild that we liked and thought would be good fits. Some of them decided to try their hands with other guilds, and we parted on good terms. By the end of the week, we had the bulk of the raid group in this new guild, although not enough spots to start up 25 mans again. We eventually did get the 25 mans rolling again, often using random players to fit spots. I also reported any of the particularly nasty message I received and got AF and a couple of his cronies temp banned a couple times, evidently a slow learner, by provoking him into swearing during the aftermath. The whole experience actually led to my fondest memories playing the game. When they released the buff ahead of the next expansion, we ended up running the final 25-man raid instance, Sunwell, as sort of a last hurrah with some randoms. One of those randoms happened to be the former leader, one of the first hardcore raiding guilds on our server that had server transfer to merge with another guild. Some of their members were having buyer's remorse and were moving back to our server, and they were planning on restarting their guild. He enjoyed playing with us and he thought we'd be a good fit and offered to merge. We dusted off that old guild, closed down our new one, and started the next expansion as a guild with a full 25-man team plus backups ready to raid. We became one of the best raiding guilds on the server again, with many server firsts throughout Wrath of the Lich King. As for AF, word got around about how much of a D he'd been, and he continued running a small guild with his cronies. My final revenge was spread over the next couple of years before I got bored and forgot about him. He tried to join other guilds, but they wouldn't have him. I handled recruitment for the new guild and had contacts in every high-end raid guild on the server, so whenever he applied to any of them, a friendly word in the ear of my counterparts in those guilds killed any chance he had. He eventually server transferred and tried to start up again, but soon stopped when I kept tracking him down and warning people of how he managed guilds. I did some checking as I was writing this, and he managed to get another guild going a couple years later, but never got back to 25-man raiding and never achieved the same level of success. The TLDR on the whole thing is Hunter joins guild, guild prospers, old GM returns and ruins everything. Hunter takes the raid team and starts a new guild. Sometimes it really be like that. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. And which of the two stories was better? If you guys haven't had a chance to check out the other videos on the channel, there's actually a Pokemon revenge story linked in the description at the very top, as well as a weird story where a mom tries to steal a PS4. Definitely check those out. Leave a funny comment. It might be featured at the beginning of the next video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.